The Maryland sun filtered through the small window of cell block D as Valentina Cruz marked another day on the calendar she had taped to the concrete wall. 7 years, 4 months, and 16 days. That was how long she had been counting, planning, and preparing for this moment. Not her release, but what would come after. The October morning air carried the scent of autumn leaves and freedom, but Valentina felt only the cold satisfaction of a plan that had been 7 years in the making. She folded the worn photograph she had been staring at, the one that showed her standing between two people who had once meant everything to her. Diego Morales, her boyfriend of 5 years, with his charming smile and expensive watch. And beside him, Carmen Vasquez, her childhood friend and maid of honor, wearing the dress Valentina had chosen for what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. A wedding that never happened because while Valentina was supposed to be walking down the aisle, she was instead walking into a courtroom in handcuffs, charged with drug trafficking crimes she had never committed. Crimes that Diego had orchestrated and Carmen had helped execute, using Valentina's trust and love as weapons against her. The photograph was creased and faded from 7 years of handling, but every detail remained burned into Valentina's memory. The way Diego's arm was draped possessively around her waist, his fingers splayed across the small of her back in a gesture that had once made her feel protected but now seemed predatory. Carmen's bright smile looked genuine in the picture, the same smile she had worn when she convinced Valentina to be her maid of honor, when she helped plan the wedding that would never happen, when she listened to Valentina's fears about moving so much money through her bookkeeping accounts. That smile had been a lie, just like everything else about their relationship. Valentina had discovered during her first year in prison that Carmen and Diego had been sleeping together for months before the arrest, using their secret relationship to coordinate the frame that would destroy Valentina's life and secure their own future together. Officer Williams appeared at her cell door, keys jangling with familiar authority. "Cruz, time to go. Your chariot awaits." The sarcasm in his voice was nothing new. Williams had supervised Valentina's block for 3 years, watching her transform from the sobbing, broken young woman who had arrived in handcuffs to the hard, calculating person she had become. He had seen her fight when cornered by other inmates, seen her study law books in the prison library for hours every day, seen her lift weights until her hands bled and her muscles burned. Williams didn't know what Valentina was planning, but he was smart enough to recognize danger when he saw it. Valentina stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. 7 years of prison had transformed her from a naive 23-year-old bookkeeper into something harder, more dangerous, infinitely more patient. The bright-eyed woman in the photograph was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes justice required you to become both judge and executioner. The years in Maryland Correctional Institution for Women had been Valentina's education in survival, manipulation, and revenge. Her first cellmate had been a woman named Rosa Martinez, serving 20 years for second-degree murder. Rosa had killed her husband after 15 years of domestic violence, finally snapping when he threatened their children. Rosa became Valentina's first teacher in the brutal mathematics of prison life. "The system failed you just like it failed me," Rosa had told Valentina during her first terrifying week behind bars. "You can spend your time crying about it, or you can learn how to make sure it never happens again." Rosa taught Valentina how to fight, how to read people's intentions, how to project strength even when feeling vulnerable. More importantly, Rosa taught her about patience. "Revenge is like wine," Rosa would say during their late-night conversations. "It gets better with age, but only if you're willing to wait for the right moment." Valentina's second cellmate had been Maria Santos, a former accountant serving 12 years for embezzlement. Maria had stolen $2 million from her employer over 5 years, using sophisticated financial techniques that had almost gone undetected. Maria taught Valentina about money laundering, offshore accounts, and how to hide assets from government investigators. "The rich stay rich because they know how to make money invisible," Maria explained as she helped Valentina understand the complexities of financial crime. "Your boyfriend used you because you were honest, but honesty is a luxury you can't afford anymore." Maria also taught Valentina about false identities, showing her how to create believable background stories and documentation that could fool most investigators. These skills would prove invaluable when Valentina finally got her chance for revenge. The prison library became Valentina's second home, where she spent every free hour studying law, psychology, criminal justice, and case histories of successful revenge plots. She read about women who had waited decades to destroy the men who had wronged them, learning about patience, planning, and the importance of leaving no evidence behind. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, was a former prosecutor who had taken the job after retiring from 30 years in criminal law. Mrs. Patterson recognized something familiar in Valentina's intense focus on legal texts and case studies. "You're not planning to appeal your conviction, are you?" Mrs. Patterson asked one afternoon as Valentina researched precedents for overturning convictions based on prosecutorial misconduct. "You're planning something else entirely." Valentina looked up from her books, her expression giving nothing away. "I'm planning to make sure the people who destroyed my life understand what justice really means." Mrs. Patterson should have reported this conversation, but something in Valentina's quiet determination reminded her of cases where the legal system had failed victims completely. Instead, she began suggesting additional reading materials that might help Valentina understand the finer points of criminal investigation and evidence collection. The prison gym became Valentina's temple, where she transformed her soft bookkeeper's body into something harder and more dangerous. She lifted weights until her muscles burned, ran laps around the prison yard until her lungs screamed, and learned martial arts from an inmate named Jackie Chin who had been a professional fighter before her arrest for assault. Jackie taught Valentina how to kill with her bare hands, how to strike quickly and silently, how to disable someone larger and stronger through superior technique and surprise. "Violence is a tool," Jackie explained as she demonstrated how to break someone's neck with a single precise movement. "Like any tool, it's only effective if you know how to use it properly and you're willing to accept the consequences." Valentina absorbed these lessons with the same intensity she brought to everything else, understanding that physical strength might be the difference between success and failure when the time came for revenge. But Valentina's most important education came from Dr. Lisa Park, a former psychiatrist serving 8 years for insurance fraud. Dr. Park had been running an elaborate scheme where she billed insurance companies for therapy sessions that never happened, creating fake patient files and collecting payments for treatments she never provided. Dr. Park became fascinated by Valentina's case, recognizing signs of severe psychological trauma mixed with extraordinary intelligence and determination. "You're not planning simple revenge," Dr. Park observed during one of their sessions in the prison yard. "You're planning psychological warfare. You want them to suffer the way you've suffered, not just physically but emotionally." Dr. Park taught Valentina about manipulation, about understanding people's deepest fears and insecurities, about how to break someone's mind before you break their body. These lessons proved to be the most valuable part of Valentina's prison education, because they showed her how to make Diego and Carmen destroy themselves even before she arrived to finish the job. As Valentina's release date approached, she began receiving letters from a private investigator named Thomas Wright, whom she had hired using money she had saved from her prison job and carefully invested through contacts Maria Santos had provided. Wright's reports contained detailed information about Diego and Carmen's new lives in Annapolis, their successful restaurant business, their marriage, their financial situation, and their daily routines. Reading these reports, Valentina learned that they had used her $300,000 as seed money to start La Esperanza, building their dream restaurant on the foundation of her destroyed life. They had been married for 6 years, owned a beautiful townhouse worth $800,000, and were considered pillars of the Annapolis business community. They donated to local charities, sponsored youth sports teams, and had been featured in several magazine articles about successful immigrant entrepreneurs who had achieved the American dream through hard work and determination. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so infuriating. Diego and Carmen had stolen Valentina's money, framed her for their crimes, and used her sacrifice to build exactly the kind of life she had dreamed of sharing with Diego. They were living her dreams while she rotted in prison, and they had clearly convinced themselves that they deserved their success. Wright's surveillance reports showed them laughing together at expensive restaurants, taking romantic vacations to Europe, hosting dinner parties where they told stories about their humble beginnings and incredible journey to success. They had rewritten history in their minds, turning themselves into heroes of their own story while erasing any memory of the woman they had destroyed to get there. The walk through the prison corridors felt eternal and instantaneous at once. Valentina had memorized every detail of this place, every sound and smell and shadow. The echo of her footsteps on the concrete floors, the smell of industrial disinfectant that never quite covered the underlying odors of fear and desperation, the way natural light looked different when filtered through security glass and steel bars. But more importantly, she had memorized every detail of Diego and Carmen's new lives, studying Wright's surveillance reports like battle plans until she knew their routines better than they did. She knew that Diego arrived at the restaurant every morning at 8:45 to receive deliveries from their suppliers. She knew that Carmen preferred to handle administrative tasks in the afternoon when the restaurant was quiet between lunch and dinner service. She knew they both stayed late on Friday nights to count the week's receipts and plan for the following week. She knew Diego had developed a drinking problem that he hid from Carmen, stopping at a bar called Murphy's every Thursday after work to nurse whiskey and complain about business pressures to anyone who would listen. She knew Carmen had been having an affair with their wine supplier, a married man named Roberto Silva who delivered their weekly order every Tuesday morning when Diego was at the bank making deposits. The processing officer handed Valentina a plastic bag containing her few belongings and a check for $437, her accumulated wages from 7 years of prison labor. The bag contained a worn Bible that Mrs. Patterson had given her, though Valentina had long since stopped believing in divine justice. There was also a small notebook filled with her careful notes about criminal law, investigative techniques, and psychological manipulation strategies. The notebook looked innocent enough, like the journal of someone planning to appeal their conviction or study for a paralegal certification. In reality, it contained detailed plans for murder, torture, and psychological warfare that would have horrified anyone who understood what they were reading. "Don't come back, Cruz," the officer said with practiced indifference. But Valentina had no intention of coming back. She had no intention of getting caught. She had spent 7 years learning from women who had been caught, studying their mistakes and developing better methods for achieving the same goals. Outside the prison gates, the world looked different than it had 7 years ago. Newer cars filled with technology she didn't recognize, different fashions that made her feel like she had traveled through time, people staring at small screens in their hands like prayer books or crystal balls. Valentina felt like she had awakened from a long sleep into a strange new world, but her purpose remained crystal clear. The world had changed, but human nature remained the same. People were still motivated by greed, fear, love, and the desire for revenge. Understanding these motivations was the key to manipulating people, to predicting their behavior, to destroying them completely when the time came. She took a bus to Baltimore, studying the other passengers and practicing the social skills that 7 years of prison had dulled. She needed to blend in, to appear normal and harmless, to become invisible until the moment she chose to reveal herself. The bus ride gave Valentina time to review her plans one final time. She had money hidden in offshore accounts that Maria Santos had helped her establish, enough to fund her revenge and build a new life afterward. She had false identification documents and credit cards that would allow her to move freely without being tracked. She had detailed intelligence about Diego and Carmen's business, their personal relationships, their vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Most importantly, she had 7 years' worth of rage and determination that had been refined into cold, calculating purpose. She was no longer the naive young woman who had trusted the wrong people. She was something new, something dangerous, something that Diego and Carmen had created through their betrayal but could never control or predict. From Baltimore, she took a train to Washington, D.C., then a connecting train to Annapolis, finally arriving in the city where her targets had built their stolen paradise as the sun was setting over the Chesapeake Bay. The city looked prosperous and peaceful, full of sailboats and seafood restaurants and tourists who had never spent a night worrying about anything more serious than restaurant reservations. Historic buildings lined the waterfront, their brick facades glowing warm in the golden hour light. Couples walked hand in hand along the harbor, pointing at expensive yachts and planning romantic dinners at restaurants they had read about in travel magazines. The Naval Academy's imposing buildings dominated one end of the harbor, reminding everyone that this was a city built on tradition, honor, and service to country. Valentina wondered if any of these people would recognize the irony of two criminals hiding in plain sight among all this institutional integrity. Valentina checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash for a week's stay under the name Linda Rodriguez, one of several false identities she had prepared. The motel was clean but unremarkable, the kind of place where business travelers stayed when their companies were watching expenses. Her room was on the second floor with a view of the parking lot and a highway that connected Annapolis to Baltimore and Washington. She had been careful with her money during her imprisonment, saving every penny she could while also investing in the tools she would need for what came next. The room contained everything she needed for surveillance and planning: a laptop computer, high-powered binoculars, a camera with telephoto lens, and detailed maps of Annapolis marked with Diego and Carmen's home and business addresses. The first thing Valentina did was transform her appearance completely. 7 years in prison had already changed her dramatically from the soft, trusting young woman Diego and Carmen remembered. She was leaner now, harder, with muscles earned through years of lifting weights and fighting for survival. Her face had lost its rounded innocence, replaced by sharp cheekbones and eyes that revealed nothing of her inner thoughts. But she needed to change even more to ensure they wouldn't recognize her if they happened to see her during the surveillance phase of her plan. She dyed her long black hair blonde and cut it into a short, professional style that made her look like a successful businesswoman. Contact lenses changed her brown eyes to green, altering her appearance in a subtle but significant way. Makeup and new clothes completed the transformation from ex-convict to upper-middle-class professional. The woman who looked back at her from the motel bathroom mirror was a stranger, which was exactly what she needed to be. Valentina spent her first week in Annapolis conducting detailed surveillance on Diego and Carmen, learning their routines and identifying opportunities for approach. Their restaurant, La Esperanza, was located in the historic district, occupying a charming 19th-century building that had been lovingly restored with exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and large windows that offered views of the harbor. The kind of place where wealthy tourists came to eat expensive seafood and feel cultured about supporting local businesses. Outdoor seating extended onto a brick patio decorated with fairy lights and potted plants, creating the romantic atmosphere that food critics had praised in their reviews. Valentina sat at a nearby coffee shop every morning, watching through her binoculars as Diego and Carmen arrived for work, noting the times, their moods, their interactions with employees and delivery drivers. Diego had grown a beard and gained perhaps 20 pounds, but his smile was the same one that had convinced Valentina to trust him with her life savings 7 years ago. He worked the dining room like a politician during lunch and dinner service, moving from table to greet customers personally, charming elderly couples and young professionals with equal skill. His Spanish accent had become more pronounced over the years, probably because customers found it authentic and appealing. He wore expensive clothes now, tailored shirts and Italian leather shoes that cost more than Valentina had earned in 6 months as a bookkeeper. Success had made him confident in a way that bordered on arrogance, the kind of man who believed his charm could solve any problem and his smile could open any door. He had no idea that his most dangerous problem was watching him through binoculars from 2 blocks away, studying his every movement and planning his destruction with scientific precision. Carmen had kept her maiden name professionally but wore Diego's wedding ring like a trophy, a large diamond solitaire that caught the light whenever she gestured. She managed the restaurant's finances and social media presence, presenting herself as a successful entrepreneur who had built something beautiful from nothing through hard work and determination. Her Instagram account was filled with carefully staged photographs of gourmet dishes, romantic sunsets over the harbor, and inspirational quotes about following your dreams and never giving up. She had nearly 50,000 followers who admired her success story and sought advice about starting their own businesses. The comments on her posts were full of praise for her dedication, her business acumen, and her obvious love for her husband and their shared dream. If any of these followers knew that Carmen's success was built on framing an innocent woman for drug trafficking, their admiration might have been less enthusiastic. Watching them together, Valentina felt the familiar rage that had sustained her through 7 years of imprisonment, but now it was refined and focused rather than raw and emotional. They looked happy, successful, completely at peace with the lives they had built on her sacrifice. They held hands as they walked to work each morning, stopping to look at window displays and pointing out interesting boats in the harbor. They kissed goodbye when Diego left for the bank every Tuesday and Thursday, a routine that had probably developed over years of comfortable domesticity. During the lunch rush, they worked together seamlessly, Diego charming customers while Carmen handled the business operations with quiet efficiency. They had achieved everything Valentina had once dreamed of having with Diego, built the exact kind of partnership she had imagined when she agreed to help him move money through her bookkeeping accounts. They had no idea that the woman they had destroyed was now watching them, studying them, preparing to collect the debt they owed her. Valentina spent hours each day observing their routines, noting patterns and vulnerabilities that could be exploited when the time came for action. She learned that Diego was creatures of habit, arriving and leaving at the same times each day, following the same routes between home and work, eating lunch at the same time and usually ordering the same dishes from their own menu. Carmen was slightly more spontaneous, sometimes leaving early for doctor appointments or staying late to handle administrative tasks. But even her variations followed predictable patterns that could be anticipated and planned around. Valentina rented a small apartment under her false identity, choosing a building that offered a clear view of the route Diego and Carmen took between their townhouse and the restaurant. The apartment was furnished simply but comfortably, with everything she needed for extended surveillance and planning. She set up her observation post near the living room window with binoculars, camera equipment, and detailed charts tracking their movements and activities. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, and timeline charts that would have looked like the work of a law enforcement task force if anyone had seen them. In reality, they represented something much more personal and dangerous: the careful preparation of a woman who had been given 7 years to plan the perfect revenge. Over the next month, Valentina learned everything about Diego and Carmen's daily lives, their business relationships, their personal habits, and their hidden vulnerabilities. She discovered that their marriage wasn't quite as perfect as their social media presence suggested. Diego had developed a drinking problem that he tried to hide from Carmen, stopping at Murphy's bar every Thursday evening to nurse whiskey and complain about business pressures. The bartender, an older Irish woman named Molly, had become Diego's unofficial therapist, listening to his worries about competition from other restaurants, rising food costs, and the pressure of maintaining their success. Diego's complaints revealed insecurities that Valentina could exploit, fears about failure and inadequacy that had probably driven his criminal behavior 7 years earlier. Carmen's vulnerability was different but equally exploitable. She was having an affair with Roberto Silva, their wine supplier, a married man in his 40s who delivered their weekly order every Tuesday morning when Diego was at the bank. Valentina followed Carmen and Roberto to a small hotel on the outskirts of Annapolis, photographing them together and documenting their relationship with the same thoroughness she applied to everything else. The affair had been going on for at least 6 months, judging by the familiarity and comfort they displayed together. Roberto brought Carmen expensive gifts, jewelry that she couldn't wear around Diego but kept hidden in her office desk. Their relationship was passionate but also reckless, the kind of secret that could destroy both their marriages and their professional reputations if it became public knowledge. Valentina also learned about their business operations, studying their supplier relationships, employee schedules, and financial procedures. La Esperanza was successful but not as profitable as their lifestyle suggested. They were spending more money than they were earning, relying on credit and loans to maintain their expensive townhouse, luxury cars, and frequent vacations. Their success was partly an illusion, sustained by debt and the desperate need to project prosperity to their customers and competitors. This financial pressure made them vulnerable to the kind of systematic destruction Valentina was planning, because they lacked the resources to survive a sustained attack on their business and personal lives. The restaurant staff consisted of 12 employees, 6 servers, 4 kitchen workers, 1 hostess, and 1 assistant manager. Most were young people working their way through college or saving money for other goals. They respected Diego and Carmen as employers but weren't particularly loyal or invested in the restaurant's success. This meant they wouldn't fight to protect their bosses if Valentina's plan put La Esperanza out of business. In fact, some of the employees had complained privately about Diego's drinking and Carmen's increasingly demanding behavior, suggesting that workplace morale wasn't as positive as the public image suggested. As Valentina studied her targets, she began to develop a detailed plan that would destroy them psychologically before killing them physically. She wanted Diego and Carmen to understand exactly who was destroying them and why, to experience the same sense of helplessness and betrayal that she had felt during her arrest and trial. She wanted them to watch their carefully constructed life collapse piece by piece, their business fail, their marriage implode, their reputations crumble. Only after they had lost everything that mattered to them would she complete her revenge with their deaths. This psychological component was crucial because it transformed simple murder into true justice, forcing them to experience consequences proportional to the damage they had inflicted on Valentina's life. The plan began to crystallize as Valentina studied their habits and vulnerabilities more carefully. She would start by exposing Carmen's affair to Diego, using photographs and documentation to shatter his trust in his wife and business partner. Simultaneously, she would begin sabotaging their restaurant through anonymous complaints to health inspectors, false reviews on social media, and rumors about food poisoning and poor sanitation. She would target their supplier relationships by spreading stories about their financial instability, causing vendors to demand immediate payment or terminate their contracts. These coordinated attacks would create stress and paranoia that would make Diego drink more and Carmen become increasingly desperate to preserve their crumbling empire. As their business and marriage began to fail, Valentina would reveal herself gradually, letting them realize that their past had finally caught up with them. She would make them understand that the woman they had destroyed was not only still alive but had spent 7 years becoming strong enough to destroy them in return. The psychological pressure would be overwhelming, especially when they realized that their victim had acquired the skills and determination to hunt them down and make them pay for their crimes. Fear would consume them as they waited for the final confrontation, knowing it was coming but not knowing when or how it would happen. The opportunity Valentina had been waiting for came in November, when Diego and Carmen announced on social media that they would be hosting a special anniversary dinner at La Esperanza to celebrate 7 years of marriage. 7 years. The same amount of time Valentina had spent in prison for their crimes. The cosmic symmetry was too perfect to ignore, as if the universe itself was providing the perfect moment for revenge. The anniversary dinner would attract their friends, business associates, and most important customers, creating a public celebration of the life they had built on Valentina's sacrifice. It would also provide the perfect opportunity for Valentina to destroy them publicly, ensuring that their downfall would be witnessed by everyone who had admired their success story. Valentina spent 2 weeks preparing for the anniversary dinner, studying the restaurant's layout, its security measures, and its staff routines with obsessive attention to detail. She learned that Diego and Carmen always stayed late after special events, cleaning up and counting the night's receipts in the restaurant's office while their employees went home. This routine would leave them alone and vulnerable, isolated from the busy streets where someone might hear screams or calls for help. The restaurant's office was located on the 2nd floor, accessible through a staircase at the back of the building. The office had windows facing the harbor, but they were small and high enough that people on the street couldn't see inside clearly. These factors made it the perfect location for an extended confrontation that wouldn't be interrupted by witnesses or passers-by. During her reconnaissance, Valentina also studied the restaurant's security systems, discovering that they relied on a basic alarm system that was at least 10 years old and easily bypassed with techniques she had learned from Rosa Martinez and other inmates. The building's locks were standard commercial grade, vulnerable to the picking techniques Jackie Chen had taught her during their late-night conversations in the prison yard. Diego and Carmen had become comfortable and careless over the years, relying on their reputation and community standing rather than serious security measures to protect themselves. This complacency would be their downfall, because they had never considered that one of their victims might someday return to collect what was owed. On the night of November 15th, Valentina dressed in all black and positioned herself in the alley behind La Esperanza, watching as the anniversary celebration reached its peak. Through the restaurant's windows, she could see Diego working the room with his characteristic charm, greeting guests and telling stories about their journey from Baltimore immigrants to successful Annapolis entrepreneurs. Carmen moved through the crowd like a hostess at a private party, ensuring that everyone had enough wine and felt personally welcomed. They looked happy and relaxed, surrounded by people who admired their success and considered them valued members of the community. The celebration represented everything they had achieved by destroying Valentina's life, the respect and prosperity they had purchased with her freedom and her daughter's childhood. Valentina had purchased her weapons through connections Rosa Martinez had provided, women who understood that sometimes the law failed you and you had to create your own justice. The gun was a small .22 caliber pistol, lightweight and easy to conceal but deadly at close range. It was untraceable, purchased with cash from a dealer who asked no questions and kept no records of transactions that might later interest law enforcement agencies. Valentina also carried a knife with a 6-inch blade that she had sharpened to razor precision, along with rope, duct tape and plastic bags for controlling the crime scene and managing evidence. She had learned in prison that preparation was the difference between success and failure, between freedom and a life sentence. The anniversary dinner was a success, judging by the laughter and conversation that drifted from the restaurant's windows throughout the evening. Valentina waited patiently in the shadows, watching as the last customers left around 10:30, followed by the waitstaff and kitchen crew who were eager to get home after a long, busy shift. By 11:15, only Diego and Carmen remained, their silhouettes visible through the office window as they counted money and discussed the evening's success. They were probably planning their next expansion, dreaming of opening additional locations or perhaps purchasing the vacation home they had been talking about on social media. All of their plans were built on the foundation of Valentina's destroyed life, and all of them were about to come to an abrupt end. Valentina used a set of lock picks she had learned to make in prison, carefully fashioned from metal scraps and sharpened to precise tolerances that would slip through standard pin tumbler mechanisms without setting off alarm systems. Rosa Martinez had taught her these techniques during their second year as cellmates, passing on knowledge gained during 20 years of burglary before the murder that finally landed her in prison permanently. The alarm system was old and basic, easily bypassed with a technique that involved cutting specific wires in a sequence that prevented the system from registering the breach. Within 5 minutes, Valentina was inside the restaurant, moving through the dining room like a shadow. The restaurant's interior was elegant but comfortable, with exposed brick walls decorated with photographs of the Chesapeake Bay and local landmarks. Tables were set for the next day's lunch service, white tablecloths and polished silverware catching the light from street lamps outside. The kitchen was spotless, equipment cleaned and organized according to health department regulations that Diego and Carmen followed meticulously to maintain their excellent reputation. Everything about the restaurant reflected success, attention to detail and genuine pride in their work. Under other circumstances, Valentina might have admired what they had accomplished. Instead, she saw only the physical manifestation of her own stolen dreams. As Valentina approached the staircase leading to the second-floor office, she could hear Diego and Carmen's voices clearly, relaxed and happy as they celebrated their anniversary and planned their future together. 7 years, Carmen was saying as Valentina climbed the stairs silently. I can't believe how far we've come since Baltimore. Sometimes I think about how different our lives might have been if we hadn't made those hard choices. We made the right choice, Diego replied, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had convinced himself that his crimes were justified by their success. Sometimes you have to sacrifice one person to save everyone else. Valentina would have brought us all down if we hadn't acted when we did. She was always too naive to understand how the world really works. She trusted us completely, Carmen agreed, and Valentina could hear something that might have been regret in her voice. Sometimes I wonder what happened to her, whether she's okay, whether she understands why we had to do what we did. Diego's response revealed the callousness that had made their betrayal possible. She got 7 years, which was less than she deserved for being stupid enough to get caught. If she was smart, she would have kept her mouth shut and served her time quietly. Instead, she tried to fight the charges and make us look bad. She brought her problems on herself. Valentina pushed open the office door and stepped into the light, the gun steady in her hands. Hello, Diego. Hello, Carmen. They froze like deer in headlights, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, their faces transforming from celebration to terror in the space of a heartbeat. The office was small but well organized, with a desk covered in receipts and financial documents, filing cabinets full of business records, and a small safe where they kept the day's cash receipts. Photographs on the walls showed Diego and Carmen at various community events, ribbon cuttings and charity fundraisers where they had been honored as successful local business owners. A large window offered a view of the harbor where expensive yachts bobbed at their moorings, illuminated by dock lights that created romantic reflections on the dark water. Diego recovered first, his salesman instincts kicking in even in the face of mortal danger. He had built his career on reading people and adapting his approach to whatever they wanted to hear, and even now he was calculating how to manipulate this situation to his advantage. "Valentina," he said with forced calm, setting down his champagne glass slowly and raising his hands in a gesture of non-aggression. "You look different. Good. Prison must have agreed with you in some ways." His voice carried the same smooth confidence he had used to convince her to move drug money through her bookkeeping accounts, the same charm that had made her believe he loved her enough to share a future together. Valentina smiled without warmth, studying the fear in his eyes and savoring the reversal of power between them. 7 years gave me a lot of time to think, to plan, to decide exactly how I wanted this moment to go. She closed the office door behind her and turned the lock, the sound echoing in the small room like a death knell. Time to study criminal psychology, investigative techniques, and case histories of successful revenge plots. Time to get stronger, smarter, more dangerous than you ever imagined possible. The gun remained pointed at Diego's chest, her grip steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 7 years of weight training and martial arts practice had given her the physical control to remain calm under pressure, while 7 years of studying criminal cases had taught her the importance of maintaining psychological dominance throughout the confrontation. Carmen found her voice, though it trembled with fear and what might have been genuine remorse. "Valentina, we can explain everything. You don't understand what really happened. We never wanted you to get hurt." Her words sounded hollow even to herself, the kind of desperate lie people tell when they're trying to avoid consequences for choices they know were wrong. Carmen had been Valentina's best friend since middle school, the person she had trusted with her deepest secrets and her greatest fears. That trust had made the betrayal even more devastating, because Valentina had never suspected that someone who knew her so well would use that knowledge to destroy her life. "I understand perfectly," Valentina replied, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "You needed someone to take the fall for your drug trafficking operation. You chose me because I trusted you both completely. Because I loved Diego and considered Carmen my sister. Because you knew I would never see it coming until it was too late to protect myself." She gestured with the gun for them to move away from the desk, creating distance that would prevent them from reaching for weapons or phones. "You manipulated my love and friendship into weapons you could use against me, then discarded me like garbage when I was no longer useful to your plans." Diego tried to stand, probably planning to use his size advantage to overpower her, but Valentina gestured sharply with the gun for him to remain seated. 7 years of fighting for survival in prison had taught her to recognize aggressive intentions before they became dangerous actions. "That money was supposed to be for our wedding," she continued, her voice growing harder as she remembered the dreams they had stolen from her. "The $300,000 you convinced me to move through my bookkeeping accounts. You said it was temporary, just until your family's business problems were resolved. You said we would use it to start our life together after we got married." "It was temporary," Diego protested, falling back on the same lies that had worked 7 years earlier. "We never meant for you to get caught. The plan was supposed to be foolproof, but the FBI moved faster than we expected. We thought we had more time to clean up the trail and make sure you were protected." His words revealed the arrogance that had made him think he could outsmart federal investigators, the same overconfidence that had convinced him Valentina would never discover the truth about their betrayal. "But when the FBI closed in, you made sure I was the only one they could find," Valentina said, her voice carrying 7 years' worth of accumulated bitterness. "You and Carmen disappeared with the money while I went to prison for crimes you committed. You built this restaurant, this life, this marriage with money that was meant for our future together. She studied their faces, looking for signs of genuine remorse but seeing only fear and self-preservation. You used my love and trust to finance your dreams while destroying mine completely. Carmen was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks in black rivulets that ruined her carefully applied makeup. We didn't have a choice, she sobbed, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. The cartel would have killed us if we didn't pay them back. We thought you would get probation, maybe community service. We never expected them to give you 7 years. Her words revealed the casual cruelty of people who had convinced themselves that someone else's suffering was acceptable if it served their purposes. Carmen had probably told herself this story so many times that she almost believed it, rewriting history to make herself the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of someone else's destruction. 7 years, Valentina repeated, letting the words hang in the air like an accusation. The same length as your marriage. Do you know what 7 years in prison does to a person? Do you know what it's like to give birth to a baby in shackles, then watch them take her away because convicted drug dealers aren't allowed to keep their children? The color drained from Diego's face as he realized that his betrayal had consequences he had never considered. You had a baby? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Your baby, Valentina said, watching his expression crumble as the full weight of his actions became clear. Our daughter, Isabella. She's 7 years old now and lives with my mother in El Salvador because her mother is a convicted felon who can't get custody. She thinks I abandoned her, just like her father abandoned both of us. Diego's face went pale as he processed this information, probably calculating the legal and emotional implications of having a child he had never acknowledged or supported. Diego reached toward her, his eyes filling with tears that might have been genuine remorse or simple fear of consequences. Valentina, I'm sorry. I never knew about the baby. We can fix this, we have money now, we can help you get Isabella back. His offer was probably sincere, motivated by guilt and terror, but it came 7 years too late to matter. We can give you everything we took from you with interest. We can turn ourselves into the police and tell them the truth about what really happened. You had your chance to help me 7 years ago, Valentina replied, her voice cold as winter steel. Instead, you chose to sacrifice me to save yourselves. You let me give birth in prison and lose custody of my daughter because you were more concerned with protecting your own freedom than taking responsibility for your crimes. She studied his face, looking for the man she had once loved but seeing only a stranger who had used her feelings against her. Now it's time to pay for that choice. Carmen tried to run for the door, but Valentina was faster, her reflexes sharpened by 7 years of prison fights and survival situations. She grabbed Carmen by the hair and pressed the gun against her temple, feeling her former friend's body tremble with terror. Sit down, she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to project strength even when outnumbered and outgunned. Both of you are going to stay right here until I'm finished explaining why you're going to die tonight. Diego raised his hands in surrender, his charm finally failing him completely as he realized that manipulation and persuasion would not save him from the consequences of his actions. Please, Valentina. I know we hurt you, but killing us won't bring back the time you lost. It won't get Isabella back. It will just put you back in prison for the rest of your life. His words carried the desperate logic of someone trying to find any argument that might preserve his life, but they also revealed his continued failure to understand the depth of damage he had caused. I spent 7 years learning how not to get caught, Valentina said, forcing Carmen into a chair and moving to secure Diego as well. I studied every case, every investigation, every mistake that leads people to prison. I learned from women who had been caught and women who had never been suspected. I'm not the naive girl you manipulated anymore. I'm something you created, something harder and more dangerous than you ever imagined possible. She retrieved rope from her bag, the same type of restraints she had seen used effectively in prison to control dangerous situations. As she tied their hands behind their backs, Valentina continued her explanation, wanting them to understand exactly who was destroying them and why. I learned about forensic evidence, about how police investigations work, about how to kill people without leaving traces that could be connected to a specific perpetrator. I studied chemistry, psychology, and anatomy. I learned about poisons that mimic natural death, about accidents that look random but are actually carefully planned, about how to make people disappear without anyone knowing they were murdered. Her words were designed to increase their terror, but they were also completely true. 7 years in prison had been Valentina's graduate education in criminal methodology. Diego struggled against his restraints, probably hoping to break free and overpower her before she could complete whatever plan she had developed. But Rosa Martinez had taught Valentina how to tie knots that would only tighten if the victim struggled, and Jackie Chan had shown her how to disable someone's shoulders and arms so they couldn't generate the leverage needed to escape. "Do you know what the worst part was?" she asked as she secured the duct tape over their mouths, muffling their attempts to plead or negotiate. "It wasn't the beatings from other inmates or the terrible food or sleeping on a concrete slab for 7 years. It was the letters I wrote to you, Diego. Hundreds of letters, begging you to visit me, to call me, to help me prove my innocence. Letters that came back marked return to sender because you had moved and left no forwarding address." Valentina retrieved the knife from her jacket, a 6-inch blade she had sharpened to razor precision using techniques learned from women who had killed their abusers, their rivals, or their betrayers. "I wrote to you too, Carmen. I told you about the pregnancy, about how scared I was, about how I needed my best friend to help me through the worst time of my life. But you were too busy spending my money and planning your wedding to care about the woman whose life you had destroyed." She tested the knife's edge against her thumb, drawing a thin line of blood that demonstrated its sharpness. What followed was not quick or merciful, because mercy was a luxury that Diego and Carmen had never offered to Valentina during her 7 years of imprisonment. She had learned patience in prison, and she used every minute of it to ensure that her former lover and best friend understood the full weight of their crimes against her. The cuts she made were careful and precise, designed to cause maximum pain while keeping them conscious and aware for as long as possible. She wanted them to experience every moment of their punishment, to understand that their deaths were not random violence but justice delivered by the woman they had tried to destroy. As she worked, Valentina talked to them about Isabella, describing the daughter who would grow up knowing her parents were criminals and murderers. She told them about the beatings she had endured from inmates who considered child abandonment worse than drug trafficking, about the nights she had lain awake wondering if her daughter was safe and loved. She explained how their betrayal had not just stolen 7 years of her life, but had poisoned every relationship and opportunity that might have followed her release from prison. Their crime had been more than theft or fraud. It had been the complete destruction of another human being's future. Diego died first, his body finally succumbing to blood loss after nearly 2 hours of systematic torture. His last conscious moment was spent looking into Valentina's eyes, finally understanding that the naive young woman he had manipulated was gone forever, replaced by something harder and more dangerous than he had ever imagined possible. Carmen lasted longer, perhaps because her terror gave her additional strength, or perhaps because Valentina wanted her former best friend to watch Diego die before experiencing her own death. Carmen's final moments were spent in the knowledge that their perfect life together had been an illusion built on someone else's suffering, and that suffering had finally returned to claim what was owed. By 3 in the morning, both Diego and Carmen were dead, their bodies positioned to make it look like a robbery gone wrong that had turned violent when they resisted their attackers. Valentina scattered the restaurant's cash receipts around the office, broke open the safe to make it appear that robbery had been the motive, and created the kind of chaos that would suggest multiple perpetrators looking for quick money. She had studied dozens of similar crime scenes during her research, learning how to create evidence patterns that would mislead investigators and point them toward explanations that had nothing to do with personal revenge. The cleanup process was methodical and thorough, guided by principles Dr. Lisa Park had taught her about crime scene forensics and evidence collection. Valentina cleaned the blood from her knife using industrial bleach that would destroy any DNA evidence, disposed of the rope and duct tape in a dumpster 6 blocks away where they would be collected with regular garbage and taken to a landfill, and changed into fresh clothes that bore no traces of the evening's activities. Every surface she had touched was wiped clean with alcohol-based sanitizer that would eliminate fingerprints and biological traces. The gun went into the Chesapeake Bay, weighted down with chains that would keep it on the bottom forever among dozens of other weapons that had been disposed of by people who understood that some problems required permanent solutions. Valentina drove to a different section of the bay to dispose of her blood-stained clothes, burning them in a small fire she built on a secluded beach before scattering the ashes in the water. By dawn, she was on a bus to New York City, just another passenger traveling with a small suitcase and a carefully constructed false identity. The news of the murders reached national media within 48 hours, generating the kind of sensational coverage that television producers loved because it combined successful entrepreneurs, brutal violence, and the mystery of who might have wanted to destroy such apparently admirable people. 2 successful restaurant owners killed during an apparent robbery, their American dream destroyed by random violence that could strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. The story had all the elements that made viewers feel both fascinated and frightened, drawing them into a narrative about hard-working immigrants whose success had made them targets for criminals who wanted to steal what others had earned through dedication and integrity. The Annapolis police investigated thoroughly, bringing in federal resources and forensic specialists who examined every aspect of the crime scene. They found evidence of forced entry, signs of struggle, and clear indications that the killers had been searching for cash and valuables. The safe had been emptied, expensive wine bottles had been stolen, and jewelry that Carmen wore to work had been taken from her body. Everything pointed to a robbery that had escalated to murder when Diego and Carmen tried to protect their property and their lives. Detective Sarah Martinez led the investigation with the thoroughness and dedication that had made her one of Maryland's most respected homicide investigators. She interviewed employees, suppliers, customers, and competitors, looking for anyone who might have harbored resentment against the successful restaurant owners. She reviewed their financial records, their business relationships, and their personal lives, searching for evidence of conflicts that might have motivated someone to murder them. But every lead pointed toward random crime rather than personal vendetta, and every witness described Diego and Carmen as beloved members of the community who had no known enemies. The investigation continued for 8 months, generating hundreds of interviews and thousands of pages of documentation, but ultimately concluded that Diego and Carmen had been victims of a robbery committed by professional criminals who had targeted them specifically because of their restaurant's success and cash business model. The case was never officially closed, but active investigation ceased when all promising leads had been exhausted and no new evidence emerged to point investigators toward specific suspects. Valentina read about the investigation from a small apartment in Brooklyn, where she was working as a bookkeeper under her new identity and slowly building the foundation for her next phase of life. She felt no remorse for Diego and Carmen's deaths, only the satisfaction of a debt finally collected after 7 years of patient planning. They had stolen her money, framed her for their crimes, destroyed her relationship with her daughter, and used her sacrifice to build their own successful life. Their deaths had been payment for those crimes, interest accumulated over 7 years of careful calculation and preparation. But Valentina's work was not quite complete, because her daughter Isabella was still living in El Salvador with her grandmother, growing up believing that her mother had abandoned her for a life of crime. Valentina used money she had carefully accumulated during her imprisonment, along with funds she had taken from Diego and Carmen's restaurant accounts during the final phase of her plan, to hire the best family lawyer in Central America. She also retained a powerful immigration attorney who specialized in reuniting families separated by criminal justice system failures. The legal process took nearly a year, but Valentina's case was strengthened by new evidence that had emerged during the investigation into Diego and Carmen's murders. Police had discovered financial records and computer files that suggested they had been involved in extensive money laundering operations during their time in Baltimore, lending credibility to claims that Valentina had been framed for crimes she didn't commit. The combination of this evidence, expert legal representation, and Valentina's clean record during her imprisonment convinced family court judges that she deserved a chance to rebuild her relationship with her daughter. Isabella Cruz arrived in New York on a warm spring morning, a beautiful 8-year-old girl who looked like her father but had inherited her mother's intelligence and determination. She spoke mostly Spanish and seemed overwhelmed by the busy city environment, clinging to the social worker who had accompanied her from El Salvador. Valentina met them at Kennedy Airport, wearing her best dress and carrying flowers that she hoped would make a good first impression on the daughter she had been forced to give up at birth. The reunion was awkward and emotional, complicated by years of separation and the lies Isabella had been told about why her mother had been absent from her life. She had been raised believing that Valentina was a criminal who had chosen drugs and crime over motherhood, abandoning her daughter to pursue a selfish lifestyle that had inevitably led to imprisonment. The truth about Diego's betrayal and Carmen's complicity was too complex for an 8-year-old to understand, so Valentina simply told Isabella that she had been wrongly accused of crimes she didn't commit and had spent years fighting to prove her innocence so they could be together. Isabella was smart enough to sense that this explanation was incomplete, but young enough to be willing to build a relationship with the mother she had always wondered about. Children are remarkably adaptable, and over the following months she began to adjust to their new life in New York. Valentina enrolled her in a good school where she could learn English while maintaining her Spanish, found activities that would help her make friends and develop her interests, and slowly began to rebuild the maternal bond that had been severed when Isabella was taken from her arms 7 years earlier. The process was not easy, because both mother and daughter had been shaped by trauma and separation in ways that created barriers to simple affection and trust. Isabella had grown up believing she was unwanted, while Valentina had spent 7 years becoming someone harder and more dangerous than the young mother who had given birth in prison shackles. But they worked together with patience and dedication, supported by therapists who specialized in helping families reunite after extended separations. Valentina also began the process of building a legitimate life that could support their future together. She used her false identity to enroll in college, studying business administration and accounting while working part-time to pay their expenses. Her prison education in financial crime and money laundering translated surprisingly well to legitimate business practices, and she discovered that her understanding of complex financial systems made her valuable to employers who needed someone who could detect and prevent fraud. Within 2 years, Valentina had earned her bachelor's degree and opened her own accounting firm, specializing in helping small businesses owned by immigrants and women who faced the same kinds of challenges she had overcome. Her firm, Cruz Financial Services, became known for its attention to detail, its ethical practices, and its commitment to helping clients navigate complex financial and legal systems. Many of her clients were women who had escaped domestic violence, immigrants who were building new lives in America, and former prisoners who were trying to rebuild after serving their sentences. Isabella thrived in their new environment, excelling in school and developing friendships with classmates who accepted her as simply another New York kid with an interesting family story. She showed particular talent for art and music, interests that Valentina encouraged with the kind of attention and resources she had never been able to provide during her imprisonment. Isabella never asked directly about her father, but Valentina could see her daughter's intelligence working to piece together the adult complexities that had shaped her early childhood. On quiet evenings, as Isabella did homework at their kitchen table and Valentina reviewed client files, they looked like any other single mother and daughter building a life together through hard work and mutual support. But Valentina never forgot the price that had been paid for their happiness, or the lessons about trust, betrayal, and survival that had been carved into her soul during 7 years of imprisonment. She kept her guard up, maintaining the skills and awareness that had enabled her to hunt down Diego and Carmen and make them pay for their crimes. Years passed, and the memory of that November night in Annapolis faded into the background of Valentina's carefully constructed new life. Isabella graduated high school with honors and earned a scholarship to study art at Columbia University. She had grown into a confident young woman who knew her mother had overcome tremendous obstacles to give her opportunities for success and happiness. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of their destroyed past, creating the kind of loving relationship that Diego and Carmen's betrayal had nearly made impossible. But Valentina never completely put away the tools and skills she had learned during her quest for revenge. She maintained her false identities, kept cash reserves and offshore accounts, and stayed in touch with some of the women she had met in prison who understood that sometimes the legal system failed and you had to create your own justice. Not because she was planning another campaign of revenge, but because she knew that the world was full of people who would use trust and love as weapons against the innocent if given the opportunity. Late at night, when Isabella was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Valentina would sometimes take out the old photograph that showed her standing between Diego and Carmen, back when she had believed in their love and friendship and shared dreams. She would study their faces, remembering who they had been to her before she learned who they really were underneath their charming facades. Then she would put the photograph away and check the locks on their door, because she understood that the price of safety was eternal vigilance against people who would destroy others to achieve their own goals. The story of Valentina Cruz officially ended on that November night in Annapolis when Diego Morales and Carmen Vasquez paid for their crimes with their lives. But the story of the woman she became afterward, the mother and advocate and survivor who built something meaningful from the ashes of her destroyed innocence, continued every day in the choices she made and the people she helped. She had learned that justice sometimes wore a beautiful face and spoke with a loving voice, just as revenge sometimes looked like a broken woman who had finally found the strength to fight back. In the end, Valentina decided that the 7 years she had lost to prison had been worth the lessons they taught her about the true nature of power, trust, and survival. She had paid a terrible price to learn who she really was beneath the naive surface of her younger self, but that knowledge had made her capable of protecting her daughter and helping other victims in ways that her innocent former self never could have imagined. Diego and Carmen had thought they were destroying her when they framed her for their crimes, but they had actually created something much more dangerous than the trusting young woman they had manipulated. They had created a mother who understood exactly how far she was willing to go to protect the people she loved, and a survivor who knew that the most important battles are sometimes fought in shadows by people who refuse to be victims any longer than absolutely necessary.